In the last lesson, we discussed the approach for weakening, strengthening, and assumptions questions on the GRE's RCs. In this lesson, we would be applying the approach on a GRE-like example. Before we do so, you may want to pause the video and revise the approach. Let's take a GRE-like example now. Here is the question, and here is our mind map approach. We have seen this passage in earlier lessons, and this is the mind map we came up with. Our first bite was the first sentence of the passage. What did it do? It raised a question around whether this scientist can be considered a remarkable one. Our second bite is this part of the passage. What did this bite do? It developed a case for yes as the answer, as in why this scientist should be considered a remarkable one. Then we saw a contrast trigger, followed by what we can consider the last bite of the passage. And what this does is to develop a case for no as the answer, as in why this scientist cannot be considered a remarkable one. We completed the first 4 steps, and now we must go about reading the question stem. We see that it is an assumption question. We need to find the assumption in argument that our scientist is not a remarkable scientist. There are 2 main points suggested in the passage around why our scientist may not be a remarkable one. The first is his weak standing among scientists, and the second is his nature of work being of a certain type rather than of another type, the sorts that possibly these remarkable scientists were involved in. Answer choice D hits the nail on its head by pointing out the assumption that if a scientist primarily liaises between the sciences, he cannot be considered remarkable. Once again, the argument of this specialist is that our scientist best served as a liaison between the sciences rather than doing something else, implying that this is the reason why our scientist cannot be grouped alongside these grades. The assumption here is that doing this nature of work cannot make a scientist remarkable. Choice D is the correct answer choice. Let's still look at the other answer choices. The passage talks about due recognition, therefore, answer choices on the lines of fame being unwarranted or our scientist not being well respected are not the assumptions made in the argument. We only know that these scientists did specialize in major programs in the laboratory. Whether they also liaise between the sciences, we don't know. This assumption is not required for reaching this conclusion. Remember, an assumption statement strengthens an argument and is necessarily true for the argument to hold. Imagine, even if these scientists also liaised between the sciences, this would not have any bearing on this conclusion here. Therefore, this answer choice is incorrect. That this specialist mentioned in the argument duly recognized the extent of our scientist's influence has no bearing on the conclusion that our scientist is not a remarkable one. Therefore, answer choice E is also incorrect. Answer choice D duly points out the assumption made in this part of the passage for reaching an assertion that our scientist is not a remarkable one. This is an interesting, difficult question. If you got this right and through a complete and coherent reasoning, excellent job.